The first thing I did was trace over an old design I did of a nightmare. This was to give myself a base to work off of, since I find it easier to change things rather than to just draw from a blank page. This nightmare design I actually redo later to make it more uniform with the horses that we get at the end of this video. After I have my base set up, I start by going over it again to fix some anatomy issues. I'm using the photo you see in the top left corner as one of my references, but I did do a lot of studying of horse anatomy before I started drawing, just so I better understand their anatomy and what I would like my character to look like. In the second sketch, the main thing I fixed were the legs and face. For the legs, I cleaned them up a bit and also changed the shape of the hooves a little bit, as I didn't like the curves that I had before. And then for the face, I wanted it to be more realistic than the original nightmare design. I like the cartoon design, but when you put a person next to the horse or on its back, it looks funky, and I just wasn't there for it. So my base at this point does have some issues with its proportions, so I made the body a bit longer and the neck a bit thinner to fix that. Next, I roughly sketched out the saddle and bridle just to get a feel for what they would look like on the horse. And I also pulled in a character that I've already designed and finished, and just took a moment to see what it would look like next to the horse design that I have, and make sure that they matched in both style and size, and it wasn't like too far-fetched. I was pretty happy with how the characters compared to the horses, and so I took a pause to do the line art, and while working on the line art, I did tweak some of the anatomy, mainly that front leg that wasn't quite long enough. Since this drawing is for my comic, I wanted to keep everything pretty simple and easy to draw, since I'm going to be drawing it so many times. So for the mane and tail, I kept it pretty basic, and I tried to limit the amount of strands that I put in the hair. So as I add on the different parts to the horse, like you can see with the mane, I will draw it on a separate layer, and then once I'm happy with it, I'll erase the parts it covers and add it to the base and merge them together. Since I have the basic horse done, I went ahead and added the thick outline to the body, which I do with all of my characters for my comic. You'll see as I add parts like the saddle, I outline those separately from the horse, just to kind of separate them with the thicker line around the object. Once I finish, I duplicated the line art just so I could have the regular horse, and then when I add on the tack to a horse, I'll have it separately. Like I did for the anatomy of the horse, I looked up a bunch of reference photos for the bridle and the saddle, and then I picked one out that I liked that was relatively simple to keep on the screen, just as something I could glance at while I was designing what I wanted them to look like. I knew from the beginning I wanted the horses to have Western style saddles, mostly because of my character's line of work, plus I just liked them better visually. When I went to draw the bridle, I had decided just to completely resketch it because I didn't like what I had compared to like what I was seeing on like real horses. So I removed the ring from under the horse's ear mainly, and just fixed the straps that go around the horse's head. The hardest part of the bridle was the ring around where the bit attached, just because the circle was too thick, and I realized that it was mostly because I was using the wrong size brush, which is why you see me draw it a second time. I switched to the smaller brush that I was supposed to have been using. The bridle and the saddle was going to be the only pieces of tack I wanted on my horses at this point, so I duplicated that final line art and separated it so that way I could keep the tack separate but also have a horse to work on adding armor to. When I started on the armor, I knew I wanted a lot of points and layers, so starting with the back, I stacked up 3 layers of armor. The chest portion was not in my original plan, but after looking at horse armor for a while, most included it, which makes sense, so I decided to add it into my own design, but to keep it smaller and not as detailed as some of the ones I had seen. I also saw a lot of the neck armor wrap all the way around the horse's neck, but I didn't like that very much, so I decided to just put it on the back of the horse's neck where the mane is. And then for the face armor, I added a point to the nose. I wasn't really sure about the eyes, so I just added a sort of hood sticking out above them. And then for the ears, I just made holes instead of adding armor to cover them. With everything sketched out, I did the line art for all of the armor and then went on to draw the mane and tail with the armor. At first I wanted the tail to show, but with the mane tied up, I thought it would make more sense for the tail to also be tied up in those wraps. But you can't really see that with the armor, so I decided to just leave the tail out of the line art. For the mane, I kept each tied piece a circle just to keep it simple. I did try to make them a little bit more elaborate, but I just didn't like it. It wasn't working. So the circles were the way to go for this. After I finished drawing the armor, I realized I didn't add reins to this drawing or the one with tack, so I added those in real quick and then started on the colors. And since these are just ideas for colors, I decided to do each horse with a different coat and mostly kept them simple, solid colors, except for that first horse, which I had a little more fun with. And here is the final result of the horse design along with all their armor and tack. These will be used throughout my comic. I'll change the colors of the horses as I need them. And I'm also going to make simpler versions that I can just use as background elements, so they'll have a lot less detail.